All right, and welcome everyone to the Ginette Biro Podcast. I'm Ginette Biro, and today we are tackling the Q&A podcast. I have been waiting to do this podcast, but as always, Spirit had a few things they had to share first and foremost, and so it really is my honor to follow their leads and bring in the information in a timely fashion for when they really feel it's important. So we are getting to this beautiful Q&A podcast today, so thank you again to everyone that sent in questions. These are just awesome questions, super well thought out, and I truly appreciate you guys interacting and sharing some things you really want to know, because that's how we share information. Like, your willingness to ask is huge, so thank you so much for doing that. So let's just dive right in. So the first question I had was, hey Ginette, I was wondering if you can explain the process of reincarnation. How and when does a spirit choose to do this? If a spirit does reincarnate, then does that mean they won't be here, or they won't be there in the spirit world to greet us when we die? Great question. So as always, with any of these answers, the vast complexity of the spirit world and how things work is not black and white. And so when I say vast complexity, the spirit world's answers and opportunities are many different shades of gray. Okay, not very often is it a black and white answer. So I can give you a general idea of how this kind of works. So when a spirit crosses over, when we all cross over, we cross over to the other side, we die from our physical body in this lifetime, and on the other side we go through what's called a life review. And we go over all the ways in which we learned lessons, didn't quite learn lessons, how we affected people, both good and bad. From their perspective, we get to experience it. So that's kind of like the ultimate karmic balancer. And then after that point, we get to choose whether we want to, start to organize ourselves on the other side to come back in, or if we want to take a break, or if we want to do some higher learning on the other side, or help other spirits cross over. There's lots of things that spirits can do on the other side. And so when we choose that we are ready to then come back in, we do basically, from my understanding, what we do in every lifetime, which is we kind of sit with our council, our crew, our spirit guides, angels, you name it, and we come up with a blueprint of what we want to happen in this lifetime, or the lifetime we're coming into. Certain lessons we want to learn, and maybe some of them we are going to take from a lifetime before because we didn't quite succeed in learning them, and maybe some of them are going to be entirely new. And so those will be some of the main themes in the lifetime. And so when you're asking if a spirit does reincarnate, then does that mean they won't be there in the spirit world to greet us? Technically, yes. But here's where it gets really full of shades of gray. Most of the time, spirits won't reincarnate within the same lifetime that you live and then cross. So what I mean by that is, say you had a grandfather that passed away, or even a great-grandfather, the likelihood of him coming back in again is very low. That's not as common. Spirits usually tend to want to take a longer time on the other side to really disconnect from the very human aspects of their last life, really merge into the world of spirit and their soul, connecting to their higher self, and then coming back very separately. Oftentimes, it's been explained to me from spirits that when they come back too soon, that's when you get these memories of the past life. And sometimes that can really confuse somebody on this planet, especially if it's a really short amount of time. I've talked with some people sometimes where, a sibling of theirs passed away and then came back as their child. And that was such a short amount of time. It was actually very hard because the memories of the sibling's life was still quite vivid and breaking through in the experience of the child. So usually spirit will want to take much longer. Maybe in our lifetime, it could be a couple hundred years worth of time on the other side before they come back in. So that's kind of your general answer. Now, I do want to say as a caveat though, we can always communicate to the greater aspects of people's spirits, because it's not often that someone's entire higher self comes down onto this planet. So even though someone's incarnated on this planet, you can still connect to their higher self. And so that's where it gets a little bit confusing, right? We all have a higher self, picture like a pie, right? A whole pie. And a piece of that pie has come down as you right now in your lifetime. Now you can bring in more and more aspects of your higher self as you raise your consciousness in this lifetime, but it's not as common that someone's whole higher self comes down into an embodiment. They say that some of the prophets, like say Buddha or Jesus, for example, they contained pretty much all of their higher self or brought in all of their higher self, making them extremely enlightened. That doesn't seem to be the case for most people on the planet right now. So if someone has reincarnated, you still can communicate with their higher self. And I imagine part of that essence of their spirit could be available for you to see on the other side. But again, this is where we get into the really kind of complex versions of how it can be. So I hope that kind of helps make sense. On average, the general answer is that a spirit, once they cross over, will stay there for a while until you cross over, and maybe your children cross over, and maybe even your grandchildren cross over, and then, people will start to filter back in again. So I hope that helps make sense. Okay, the next one, Ginette. This might also be a little tough. What does spirit look like? We know they don't have actual physical bodies, so what formation do they take? I love this. So spirit can take many different forms. The basis is that spirit is energy. So most often when I'm doing a reading and spirit comes forward, they come forward as an orb. So a ruminating ball of energy, like a sphere. They'll come forward as an orb, whether they're a tiny pinprick of light that almost looks like a star, or a literal orb floating in front of me. And from that point, if they can, they'll manifest into an image of who they were. Sometimes they can manifest into an image of exactly who they were with total clarity. Other times it's like a physical outline. But the true essence of spirit is a ruminating ball of energy, which can also expand into consciousness and be one with all things. So again, it's kind of complex yet simple. Energy likes to move in spheres, but energy can also expand to take part in all things. So spirit can have a physical body and the visual of it if it brings them comfort and if that's how they like to be. They can also be at a younger age than when they passed. They can be a sphere. They can just simply be energy and be a voice or a wisdom. It's really quite unique. Now I can say from my experience, when I was on the other side in my near-death experience, I felt exactly as I am now. So I all of my experience was in that of having a body like I do now, which is interesting. However, when I remember coming back into my physical body after the surgery, I remember feeling almost like an orb coming back in to then coming into my animated physical body. So it's kind of hard to explain, but on average, spirit will always show up to me as an orb first and then manifest into an identifiable image. So I hope that helps make sense. Okay, next question is, Ginette, I really want from spirit to explain the difference between psychic and mediumship. I realize mediumship is loved ones, but psychic can also be connecting to spirit in general, which in turn is mediumship. Then with something where you can medically see what is happening in somebody's body would be referred to as psychic, but it's also connecting to spirit. I'm yet to find an answer that satisfies me and makes sense for how I connect. Wonderful question. Okay, so the general idea is that all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. But psychics can open up to mediumistic connections as well. So let's go back now. Let's rewind from that. So a traditional, typical psychic reading is the psychic is connecting to the person's energy, their aura, their energetic field, all the information that resides within that. And from that, they can pick up information of past, present, or future, or even illness, because they're responding to the frequency of the individual in front of them. And that person's frequency is telling the psychic in many different ways through visions, feelings, you name it, information about the person. Now, what makes mediumship different is mediumship is when there's a third party involved, a separate being, a separate spirit, or a separate person is coming through, and the medium is acting as the intermediary, the interpreter between what this other consciousness is saying and what this person needs to hear. So they're that middle person. So that's kind of the so-called black and white of it. But with this question, you're very right. There's many times where psychics may not consider themselves a medium, but they are so open in their reading that they do receive information from a spirit. And in that case, then it would be a mediumistic type of connection. Just as some people are more strongly mediums, they go straight to connecting with spirit, but sometimes they will be open and read something specific from the frequency of the person sitting in front of them. So there's a lot of crossover in it, and it's not, like I said, black and white. So it really is appropriate to the situation and the energy right there. So again, if you're feeling something into somebody's energy that say is medically wrong with them or off, you might psychically be getting that. But then in addition, you may be so open that their spirit guide might come through and say, hey, tell the person this, this, and this, or tell the person that they are too low in iron or something, right? And so that's when you're kind of balancing the two worlds. And really the two worlds should coexist and can and do. It's just a matter of what you're open to and what you can perceive. Some are stronger one way than another, but they definitely can blend. So I hope that helps make sense. I would imagine the biggest, most important thing is the way in which you connect is exactly the way in which you connect. And that's what matters. The title doesn't matter. It's more so the information and the validity of where the information is coming from. And how you can communicate that. So, beautiful question. All right, the next question is, it seems like our purpose at Earth School is to learn from our experiences, but I have a pretty terrible time remembering much detail from my whole life. I wonder when I pass on, will I get a complete life review like others have? It will all be new to me. Okay, so this is really interesting because there could be lots of different reasons for this. So yes, you're absolutely right. Earth School, and I love that term, is absolutely for us to gain experiences, and it's the experiences that then give our soul and our person, but give our soul wisdom. And when we've gained enough experiences of certain things, we no longer need those experiences. And so in the next lifetime, we may choose new experiences. We don't need those old ones before, right? And so the question is, when I pass on, will I get a complete life review like others? Probably yes. The highest probability would say that yes, you would get a life review. Everybody pretty much does, because it helps bring to completion this whole experience in this lifetime. And there's a value in that, wrapping it up with a bow, bringing it to a close, learning all the things you can, graduating, summing it up, all of those words. And to do that requires us to go over everything, right? To make sense of it so that we can then consciously choose where we're going in the next one. So I wouldn't worry too much about not being able to remember details from your whole life right now, because it will come back to you. It is all in your energy field. It is in your Akashic records. And actually, that's a good point. Is you may, if you're really curious about aspects of your life you can't remember right now, if you did an Akashic record reading, you may gain some really cool insights about those things, or bring those memories back to the surface. So there is a way to find it, and that might be a way to do it. So I hope that helps make sense there. Okay, now in terms of COVID, I had a couple questions about COVID, and I absolutely love them and hold space for them. But I'm going to answer COVID questions, COVID-specific questions and vaccines and all this kind of stuff in a Making Sense of Life video or a specific COVID video, because I really think that one needs its own time and space. But I will say, just so that you don't feel like you're left hanging, the biggest thing you need to do is to trust, if you have COVID questions or your choices and all this kind of stuff, feel what aligns with you. And feel what aligns with you without being wrapped in fear. Is your alignment causing you to feel that way because of fear, or is your alignment causing you to feel that way because of peace and centeredness? That's where I would start. Okay? And I'm going to leave it at that right now, but just hear me that I will come back to this, because I do think the idea of public shaming with COVID choices, all of this stuff, I think the fact that we are shaming people regardless of our perspectives is ridiculous. Spirit did touch on that on the Fear Contagion and Disclosure of Self podcast I did. And they said outward judgment of others is never going to change our shift and our growth as a collective if we continue to outwardly judge and shame others. Just as if we continue to judge and shame ourselves, we're not going to get anywhere. We have to transmute and transcend judgment and shame and come back to compassion as to why people are making the decisions they're making. Until we can understand their why, we're never going to move forward. So, connect with yourself, know your why, know thyself, and make your decisions from there, not at a place of fear. But I will talk more specifically about that in a little bit. Okay, next one. I gotta read down here a second. Okay, the lessons on letting go of outcome. How best do we balance setting goals, doing daily work to achieve the goals, yet let go and trust it will come? That's a great one. And this has been one of my personal biggest journeys with Spirit, is letting go of the outcome, especially because I can gain insights and visions, but the visions are often in pieces. And I've learned that those visions are in pieces because of the probabilities. There's multiple probabilities in any visions of things to come. So that same thing applies to when you set goals. There are many probabilities or potentialities of how that goal can come to manifest. And oftentimes when we're manifesting a goal, we have an idea of how we would want it to work. And that's great. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have your idea. But the thing is to put out your energy of what you wish, put it out based on your why and your intent, and then start making choices to move towards that in the best way that you know how. But here's the key piece, is keep an openness as to how the universe can conspire with you to make that happen. And sometimes the way in which the universe is going to present it is a little bit different than the way that you imagined it, but the outcome is going to be the same or in a better alignment for you. So letting go of outcome is basically sending it or blowing it out into the wind. Set your intent of what you want. Visualize all the ways you could imagine it could happen, and then keep an open-mindedness to how the universe can surprise you with how it can happen. Because I got to tell you, in many of the ways that I've manifested things or seen visions of things, the way in which they came together, sometimes they were bang on, but most of the time they were in a way that I could have never imagined. But when I look back on it retrospectively, it makes perfect sense. So keep an open-mindedness to wonder and curiosity, and a space for the universe to surprise you. Okay? And that way the universe will co-conspire with you. They'll co-create. And they've been talking about this. Spirit has been talking about the value of co-creation. It's so huge. So I love that you asked that question. Thank you for that. And yeah, just really keep an open-mindedness as to how it can show up. Okay, then I had a question of what is the root of reason for the heavy energies currently at play, and what can we do to help usher in more light to this process? So I love this question, and really a lot of the answers are in the last two podcasts. Starting again with the podcast I did on the Fear Contagion and Disclosure of Self, and then the one from just last week as well, about knowing thyself. The reason we are in such heavy energies right now is because we have two different timelines happening. Mother Earth is moving one direction. Humanity was supposed to be moving that way, but has actually shifted backwards. And that's causing this tension between the timelines instead of us moving all together. Now, this makes for a lot of chaos and turbulence and all of that kind of stuff. But the biggest thing and the biggest way to move through that is to be able to step back and step out of the turbulence. If you catch yourself in the turbulence of thought, of media, information, fear-based thinking, judgment or shaming or whatever, anything that kind of brings your energies down or gets you in a whirl, like a spin, that's a key indicator that you need to step back and find that peace point again. So if you can almost visualize yourself stepping out of whatever's got you frazzled or drained, step back from it and look at what it's trying to show you. There's lessons in it for everybody. And sometimes the lesson is maybe a triggering reflection of your own judgment, sometimes a judgment of self, sometimes something that can be cleared up, mended, released, or maybe it's asking you to set boundaries. What these change energies are doing on the collective, meaning for everybody, is asking each of us individually to look at what is triggering us as a result of this turbulence. Because remember, all change happens from us individually. So as we each individually change and open up to higher consciousness, then we create a greater force and a greater sum of people that do, and then we can tip the scales back again like we did in December 21st, 2020, and the winter solstice. We tip the scales. The thing is, humanity's scales tip back a bit, but we can tip them back again in our favor. That is something that the guides, the light, have been really consistent with in their messaging, is that we can choose to tip it in our favor, but all the changes start with self, which is why they're talking about knowing yourself, what that looks like, and how to, maneuver these changes. If you find you're overwhelmed, step back and look at why. You don't need to be caught up in it, okay? Okay. The next question is, I am feeling that so many of us have had extremely rapid growth in the past year, and many of us are starting to come out of the darkness and into the light full of strength and wisdom. Will we be able to feel and embrace this collective strength in the same way I've felt the collective darkness? This is a beautiful question, and I really think so. I think the more of us that stand in our light and have compassion and space for those that are working on it, and I'm not saying that our work is ever done. Our whole human experience here is for learning and growing. That is the whole reason we are here. So we will do it until the day we transition and cross over. But the more we do and the more we're willing to truly experience, the more wisdom we gain, which gives us more capabilities and compassion in dealing with change. So, I really believe we can either tune into the really high frequencies and feel the collective light, or we can focus on the darker energies and feel the collective dark. But I really think we can choose. They're just saying, Spirit's like, it always comes back to choice. So if you really feel you've grown and you've come out of the darkness, that's great. Hang on to that strength and wisdom and use it to allow you to keep choosing the light and choosing the strength. And then any aspects of your life where something darker comes up again, then you can say, hey, I know what this means. Let's look at it. Okay, let's mend it, fix it, change it, whatever, and step back into the light. Like, this is what you get to choose to do. And so I really feel the more of us that do that in consciousness and maybe share experiences, the more it inspires others to be doing the same. And again, that's the whole purpose for the shifts that we're going through. So, beautiful question. Okay. This one has a couple different questions in it, so we're just going to roll through it. Okay. Hi, Ginette. Do you think there will be a surge in psychic clairvoyant ability following this transformative time? Yes, absolutely, I do. The higher we raise our consciousness, the more access we have to those higher gifts. It's pretty simple that way. So the more people are willing to, unload some of their baggage, communicate openly with their ego, transmute a lot of their fears, the higher their frequency can go, their frequency of being. And the higher your frequency, meaning your open-mindedness, your consciousness, all of this, the more access you have with ease to clairvoyance, intuition, claircognizance, psychic abilities, you name it. It's a natural gift that we all have access to, but when we're too bogged down in drama, fear, shame, judgment, illness, not always illness, but sometimes low frequency stuff, it blocks our ability to access that. So anything that brings your frequency up will naturally give you that awakening and opening. And that's a lot of what's happening in these shifting years right now that we're in. Remember, in 2020, Spirit said that from 2020 to 2024 would be massive, rapid change. Lots and lots of shifts, which is very overwhelming, but to shift the consciousness fast. And so, yes, I absolutely believe more people will, and I think a lot of people already are. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Okay, the second part was, I always wonder, as someone who cannot communicate with spirit, can your guardian angels, spirits always hear you when you speak to them? Doesn't need to be a meditation, or can you just speak to them and they will hear you? Absolutely, they do always hear you. I think I did a Making Sense of Life video on this, but they are always connected to you all the time. Your energy is what speaks to them. So it's kind of like how we are all connected to each other with cell phones, right? We all have cell phones we can call anytime. They're all energetically connected to us. So we need to just simply think of them and they will come forward. Or if they notice a change in our frequency in which they are needed, they will come forward. Thought energy is one of the most powerful energies, actually. And so when we have thoughts that we're desiring to connect to them, it goes direct to them. They hear it. For sure they do. And I have to say too, I've battled this a couple times where in my life I felt like spirit wasn't answering me, or I felt they weren't listening. And as the lesson progressed for me personally, I always realized in the end they were listening, absolutely. Sometimes it's just they weren't able to bring an answer through. They either didn't have an answer for me, or it wasn't in my best interest to know at the time. But they always hear you. Now, one thing I want to say is if you are really wanting your guides to hear you and it helps, speak to them out loud. I'll do this sometimes even now if I'm frustrated with them or I really feel I need them to hear something. I'll speak out loud, because what that does is me hearing it, to me, validates it being said. But it doesn't make a difference whether I actually say it out loud or in my head. They will hear it. But sometimes for me, if I say it out loud, it helps. So, okay. The next one is, there's one silly question that's been bugging me for ages. So we humans are souls. We have a body. Check. Got it. What about animals? What about insects? What about plants and trees? What about the evolution of our soul? Do we always choose a life in the same species? Or could I have been an ant in a past life, or a tree? Or did they exist only of energy without a conscious mind? This is a great question. And we have so many experiences as a soul. This is why I love this question. I personally have memories, which I remember when they first came through, I just thought it was nuts. But again, with the amount I've come to learn, it's not, of course, to me. Again, take what resonates. But I have memories of being an ancient cedar tree, a very old cedar tree. And I understood the wisdom of the forests and how it was all connected through the root systems. I have memories of different lifetimes as a person. I've been a person many times. I even have a memory of being a sand dollar. And I know that sounds silly, but I remember the simplicity of it. It was simplicity. It was simply being. And there was a value in that. And so, I could do a whole podcast about that experience, but to get back to the question specifically, we do move through different consciousness levels, 100%. Now, does that mean every single ant is a consciousness that will be human? Maybe. I actually don't know. And I asked and the guides didn't give me an answer. But I will say from my own experience, I have experienced many different ways of being, because consciousness runs through everything on our planet. For us to think that, a plant doesn't embody a certain level of consciousness, I think is a bit of a shame. That's my perspective. But if you think about everything that brings life here that is allowed an experience, think about this. Let's just look at trees, for example, okay? For us to say that trees have no consciousness, well, this is an interesting thing. They are able to, through their root systems, within their kind of family units, they're able to understand when another tree is suffering, and they will actually divert their absorption of water to give it to another tree that is struggling. Now, to me, that's a certain level of consciousness, right? And that's just trees. Think about too how mushrooms and mycelium, the connecting fibers to all the different fungi in the forest that are around the world, connect through this electrical signals that run through all the forests, like a computer system, like brain neurons. If we look at the human brain, we know the human brain isn't just simply neurons. There's a consciousness that interacts with those neurons. So there's a consciousness that interacts with all of these different living things, and we can look at it on different levels, from an individual ant to an ant colony, to the ways that ants are part of the ecosystem. Like, everything is connected. So I think for us to say that, an animal has no consciousness, or even an insect, I think is a shame. Here's another thing too, is my dog, for example, this beautiful soul. She came to me in the form of a spirit guide. And she said, "I'm coming into your life." And I said, "What?" She said, "I'm coming into your life and I'm coming as a dog." And I thought, what? And I've never been a dog owner, right? And she showed me how she was coming in. She showed me when, all the things. She led it, because I was like, I don't even know where to get a dog. How do you figure out a good dog breeder? Like, I've never had a dog in my life. And she's like, I will show you the whole way and how to do it. And I know there's some dogs that sometimes we think, oh my gosh, are you in there? Do you have a brain in there? Or are you just barking for the sake of barking? And, but I mean, sometimes maybe we'll question that of people. But I can say specifically for her, she is so in tune with our family, with me, with things. She definitely has a soul and a consciousness, for sure. And that's not just me feeling really specific about my own pet, but it's the whole entire way in which she came into my world, because I wasn't looking for a dog at the time. So I really believe we get to experience many different forms. And I will go and push this a little bit further, even many different planets and incarnations and types of beings. So not even just earthly. We have lifetimes and experiences on different planets as well. So great question. And I mean, that one could be like a whole entire podcast. Okay, and then here's another one. Can you speak more on the differences between dimensions? How do you differentiate between them? How many are there and why? So this is a great one. I did do a video a while back on understanding dimensions. So my understanding and what I have seen up to at this point is we have 12 different dimensions. Now, there are some people that talk of 144, some people talk about 16, some people talk of whatever. I can only confidently share with you guys what I have experienced up to this point, and I have seen 12 dimensions. Dimensions are separated by frequency. So if we start with 3D dimension, which we are in right now, we are all here incarnate in 3D because we vibrate within a certain frequency range. Okay, there's a low range 3D and a high range 3D. And our human bodies are vibrating particles that move and connect within a certain way within 3D that make us have a 3D human life. We have human bodies. Now our spirit, if we remember our spirit, the densest part of our spirit is actually our physical human body. It's vibrating particles, just as our soul is vibrating energy, but we embody these vibrating particles. So when you raise your frequency, again, by your thoughts, your consciousness, what you put into your body, all that kind of stuff, you naturally become more high vibing. When you high vibe to a level that's just around the top of 3D, stepping into 4D, that's when you start to gain more psychic abilities, clairvoyant abilities, seeing spirits, and that's because you're vibrating into the level of frequency of 4th dimension. And that's where spirits can easily come down to 4th dimension. Now, moving up in dimensional consciousness or access is simply connected to frequency. The higher you can get your physical body to vibrate, or your physical body has to kind of keep up. But the higher you can get your soul's consciousness to vibrate within an ability to remember, the higher you can travel. Okay, the higher the dimensional access you can get. 4th dimension, I'm going to say, is the lowest and most frequented dimension. It's kind of like a highway. 5th dimension is where you start to get into more really quality spirits, a safer space. Fourth dimension is really like a busy highway of all kinds of frequencies, all kinds of beings and stuff like that. So sometimes fourth dimension can get quite muddled, and that's where some people can get pesky spirits coming through in fourth dimension and so on. So when you're raising your frequency in your mind and your intent, aim for 5D at a minimum, and then see how much higher you can go. So 3D is all about physical experiences. Fourth dimension consciousness is about opening to more, opening to an idea that there's something greater, that there's something more to do with energy. Fifth dimensional consciousness is really starting to understand the way polarity plays in 3D, and then also the way in which fourth dimensional frequency can interplay with that. Okay, once you understand that, you kind of master 5D consciousness and how you are a creator and a manifester. And then sixth dimensional consciousness is when you understand all of that and can step back from it and kind of oversee it all. That's a very quick, short explanation of it, but just for a couple other tidbits, angels to me, in my understanding and how I've seen them, typically tend to be in about ninth dimensional consciousness. It's very, very high vibratory. And the three guides of the light that I channel, they're anywhere between 9 and 12 dimensional consciousness, because they are simply light consciousness, which is one of the highest frequencies. So I hope that kind of helps answer that question. And okay, one more question. This one is all about timelines. So the question was, if someone dies in this timeline, will they merge with another timeline, or potentially just return to source if this is their final timeline? So for those of you that are wondering, timeline what? Go back through my videos. You can find them all on YouTube. They're also on Facebook, but for ease of access, you'll be able to find them on YouTube under Ginette Biro Medium. Go back and find the Parallel Lifetimes Explained. There's 1, 2, and 3, part 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 and 2 are about the scientific hypotheses of timelines, the bubble theory, what was the other one? Parallel lifetime theory. And then Spirit gave me a different one, which was the starbeam hypothesis. And it was the idea that we have our higher self, right, as kind of like a central sphere. And then we have these arms that kind of stick out like a star beam. And each of those arms, and they had showed me 8 at the time, each of those 8 arms are an embodiment of our soul living in parallel times right now. So the you that you are is living 8 or up to 8 different parallel experiences. And when you die, so this is the question, is when you die in one of those timelines, do you just return to source? Do you cross over? You go back to heaven, to the other side? Or do you merge into another timeline? Because what they were talking about, again, if you watch those videos, is how timelines for some people are merging. So to answer that question is, sometimes, from my understanding, when I've seen this before with different souls, when somebody dies in one timeline, they can merge their consciousness with another one. They can also choose to just blend those 2 timelines into one, which is really quite weird and is so hard for a human brain to wrap our mind around, but they can blend into one. And so it doesn't necessarily matter which one it is. Sometimes that part of if they die in one timeline, they may just kind of reside close to source and wait for the other pieces. I have seen that happen, where a part of someone's soul is simply waiting until the other ones run their course. But I've also seen it where somebody has died in one timeline and they merged with another. And I've also seen someone consciously choose to merge the 2 timelines without necessarily dying. They kind of, as crazy as it sounds, they kind of merge in to become one. So the way that to explain all of that would go into like quantum physics and all that kind of stuff. But to more easily answer this question, there's different ways in which that can happen. So it's not just one simple answer. They can either merge, they can sit and wait, or they don't necessarily have to die, but they merge anyways. So, and the whole reason for having parallel lifetimes is to gain the most experience possible within this incarnation. That's the idea. That's the reason. Because again, as a soul, when we come to this earth, we are wanting to learn everything we can, and we're going to make the most of it because it's a lot of work being on earth. It's very polarized, it's very dense, it's very emotional, which some spirits say is the best gift about it, and some say is the burden. And so when we can fragment basically into different experiences to gain the most, we get to really come back with a lot of wisdom. So I hope that helps. Thank you again, you guys, for these beautiful questions. I just truly love it. And I'll be doing this again. Like I said, I'm going to do the Q&A podcast a couple times a year to give you guys opportunities to pick my brain and pick Spirit's brain. 3 Guides of Light love to come through. I know Andre was with us too today. He's my guide. And so if you guys are really enjoying this, thank you. Please do like and share and subscribe and all of that kind of stuff, because my whole reason for doing this is to share. It was my promise to Spirit when I had my NDE that I would come back and just share information, share their understandings, and so that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here. So if you guys want to know more about what I offer at Avalon Spirit, check it out at avalonspirit.com. There's lots of different things on there. I talked about Akashic Record readings in this podcast today, and we do have a beautiful Akashic Record reader. Her name is Cindy Lang. She's just so good. She's read my Akashic Records so many times for me, and she's just always on the ball, on point. It's great and it's fun. She's funny too, so it's just such a easy process. So definitely check that out, and all the other offerings, the Cosmic Consciousness Circle that I do once a month, where we do super deep dives into good stuff, as well as Avalon Spirit Club, led by my business partner Lois. She takes you on a journey of discovering different ways to explore your consciousness. And as well, I have my Lightworker Mentorship Circle. So if you guys are really curious about learning how to use some of your gifts and abilities that are, like we said in here, naturally opening up, join me for the mentorship. It's a 4-week intensive. You learn tons of great stuff, and my goal is really to help you pack your metaphorical backpack of understanding so that you can go off on your journey and use it. You keep what you want, you toss out what you want, but at least I can help you pack it with the stuff that I've over time learned is really valuable. So I'll leave you with that. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. And again, I just loved this podcast, the Q&A. Thank you guys so much. And I'll be back next week.